Welcome to another deep dive. We're going to unpack this conversation with Michelle Obama on Jay Shetty's podcast.
Sounds good.
There's so much here, especially all the stuff you guys flagged about connection and authenticity and how we handle all the information in the world today.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right, how she manages to speak to these everyday struggles. Like, everyone goes through this stuff, but her life is so far from ordinary.
Totally. Like that whole Mount Everest analogy, that jumped out at me right away. It's like, yeah, it's about personal growth, but it also reveals this tension I think a lot of successful people deal with, that outgrowing certain relationships.
It's a powerful metaphor for sure, because it acknowledges, you might feel guilty even when you know it's for the best. Leaving people behind, it's tough.
Yeah, and she doesn't try to make it sound easy. She talks about almost like survivor's remorse and how she sees young people especially struggling with that. Like success can pull you away from your roots. Has that ever been something you've dealt with, that push and pull?
I mean, who hasn't? It's something we all deal with, I think. Her honesty about it is refreshing. She even says she'd rather be disappointed than miss out, which says a lot about how she approaches relationships.
Wow, yeah, that's a bold statement. Makes you think about how we often choose to protect ourselves from that disappointment over being open to something new.
Exactly. And this whole idea of staying open even when it feels risky. She talks about those kitchen table connections being so important, those people that keep you grounded.
Right, but those take work to actually maintain them when life gets crazy busy.
No doubt.
But then she throws in this contrast between that joy of being open and then losing that anonymity that comes with, the kind of fame she's had. Like, young people don't always realize that's the trade-off.
And it's so true. We glamorize fame without, acknowledging the downsides.
Yeah, she misses that Chicago that we knew before. Those simple things you just can't do anymore once you're recognizable.
I thought it was interesting how she even mentioned Barack considering living in New York after the White House.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but realizing it wouldn't be that same New York he loved. Like, what are those hidden costs of getting what you think you want?
Makes you think.
Totally. And that actually leads into another point she makes, that burden of knowing too much. She admits that being in those rooms, getting all that high-level info, it actually made her more fearful.
That's pretty heavy. I mean, it reminds us, right, that even with all she's got, she still has those same human anxieties.
Yeah, and it brings it back to us, right? We may not be in those rooms, but we all have that information overload in different ways. Constant news, negativity, it gets to you.
You start to drown in it all.
Totally.
But then she talks about those, what were they, analog antidotes? Those things she does to shut off the noise. Knitting, tennis.
I love that. It's that sense of grounding, like you accomplish something real, especially as a counter to all that digital stuff. It's interesting, right? Even Michelle Obama needs that balance.
So what are yours? What helps you shut off the noise, find some peace?
Well, I've gotten back into playing the piano, which is nice, but it's different for everyone, right? It's about finding something that brings you back into the moment. Gardening, music, being out in nature, whatever works.
And then there's her take on marriage. Which, I mean, she's so refreshingly honest. She's not pretending it's all perfect.
Right.
She says it takes work and that those decades of I don't know if I like you are normal.
So good, right. And so valuable, especially for people who buy into that fairy tale ending. Like, marriage is a choice you make every day.
A choice, yeah. And she makes this really cool distinction between deal breakers, like objectively, versus what she calls those quit-worthy moments. But she leaves it up to you to decide where your own line is.
Yeah, and that forces you to think, what are your non-negotiables? How much discomfort are you willing to work through? It's your responsibility,
Absolutely. Nobody else can make you happy. That's an inside job.
Exactly.
Right.
And for her, realizing that made her marriage stronger when she stopped expecting Barack to be everything,
Like you start to appreciate what's actually there.
Yeah, and she even talks about having those different groups of friends, like her girlfriends to talk for hours with. Like, diversifying your support system actually helps your main relationship.
Interesting.
And they communicate so differently, too, apparently.
Yeah.
He wants to fix everything right away, and she's more of an exploder, needs to process first. It sounds familiar.
So relatable. And learning to navigate those differences, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Takes practice and patience.
And a lot of forgiveness.
For sure.
It's cool how she ties that to her whole going high thing. Like, it's not about burying your feelings, but being strategic with how you communicate them.
Choosing your words carefully, depending on who you're talking to.
Exactly. And she even tells the story about, being attacked personally on the campaign trail.
Oh, wow.
And wanting to just quit, basically.
Yeah.
But instead of reacting right away, she used it to, like, become more strategic.
That's resilience right there.
And it makes you wonder, right, where in our own lives could we all benefit from going high a bit more?
In our relationships, at work, with the world in general.
It's about more than just talking, too. It's about really listening, creating space for people to feel heard, even when you disagree.
Yeah, that's something we don't always do well, do we?
She argues that when people feel ignored, that's when they lash out or do things that are destructive. So we're all kind of responsible, right, for making things more inclusive.
Not just about focusing on our own little bubble.
Right, it's about that bigger picture. And then she goes to what she sees as the root of so much division and unfairness, fear.
And she ties that to her own experiences with racism, right? How those in power exploit fear to stay in control.
It's us versus them, and it stops us from actually seeing our shared humanity and working together.
When you're scared, you just want to protect yourself.
Exactly. So her call for empathy is so important here. Not condoning bad actions, but trying to understand where they're coming from. Like, why are they acting that way? What are their fears? What made them see the world the way they do?
Like, everyone has a story.
Right. And those stories, even the tough ones, they deserve to be heard.
It's such a powerful counter to all that judgment, all that division.
It allows for actual connection, even when you have different opinions. So in the end, I think she's all about these connections, fostering that understanding, finding some common ground.
She really believes that through listening and recognizing that shared humanity, we can get past that fear that's holding us back.
It's a message that feels so relevant right now, especially with everything going on.
Absolutely.
But how do we actually put it into action? How do we bring that into our everyday lives? That's the question. That's the million-dollar question, right? Where do we even begin?
Yeah, it can feel so overwhelming.
It's about starting small, though. Like, in those everyday interactions, when you disagree with someone, how do you approach it? With curiosity?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you getting defensive?
Are you really trying to see their side of things? Even if it's tough.
And are you using your voice to speak up for those who don't have that same platform? Those who are being ignored?
Because she's saying, like, we're all responsible.
Exactly. It's about shifting from that me-first mentality to thinking about the collective.
Like, from scarcity to abundance. Okay, I like that.
And it ties into, like, she talks about fear being at the root of so much of the division, so much of the inequality we see.
Which makes sense, right? Like,
Yeah.
when you look at her own experiences with, racism and prejudice.
Totally. It's like those in power, they often use fear to control people.
It's classic divide and conquer. Create that us versus them mentality.
And it works. It stops us from seeing each other as human beings, from working together on the things we have in common.
So how do we combat that?
Well, that's where her call for empathy comes in. And she's really clear it's not about condoning harmful actions, but it's about trying to see where they're coming from.
Trying to get to the root of it.
Yeah, like asking yourself, why is this person reacting this way? What are they afraid of? What experiences have shaped their perspective?
We tend to just judge, right? Write people off.
It's easier, right? But she's saying, like, no, everyone has a story.
And those stories, even if they make you uncomfortable, they deserve to be heard.
Because that's what creates that space for genuine connection, Even when you don't see eye to eye on everything.
So it sounds like ultimately she's really about building those bridges.
Yeah.
Fostering understanding, creating a sense of shared purpose.
She truly believes that if we can just listen to each other, recognize that we're all in this together,
We can overcome those things that are holding us back.
all that fear and division, which is, that's a powerful message, especially now.
So then how do we actually turn that into action? How do we bring that into our lives?
Right, because it's easy to talk about, right? But actually doing it.
Well, she says it starts with those small choices. How we interact with the people around us.
Every single day.
Like, are we really trying to understand viewpoints that are different from our own? Are we speaking up for those who are being marginalized?
She's saying it's about shifting our mindset, right? Moving away from scarcity and fear and towards
Abundance.
Yeah.
And possibility.
Yeah, exactly. Believing that we actually can build a better world. But it takes all of us.
And then she gets more concrete, too, like investing in young people.
Yeah.
Making sure everyone has access to education, healthcare, basic necessities.
It's about those systemic changes, but also our individual choices, where we spend our money, who we vote for, how we engage in our communities.
And then even like those analog antidotes we were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah, like creating space for joy, for creativity, those simple things that remind you of the good in the world.
Those things that fill you up so you have the energy to keep fighting the good fight. So what does all this mean for you, the listener? It's a call to action, right?
Big time. Like, take a look at your own life. What are your values? What are you actually doing to live by them?
Look at your relationships. Where can you bring more empathy, more understanding? How can you contribute to a more just world?
What are your analog antidotes? What brings you joy? What keeps you grounded?
Michelle Obama's saying we all have a part to play, and that even small actions can make a difference.
It's about being intentional, being informed, and using your voice to speak up for what you believe in.
And like approaching this work with your whole self, head and heart, strategy, A&D, authenticity.
She leaves us with this amazing image, I think. This idea of a mandatory trickling down. Like, everyone should have what they need to thrive, no matter what.
It's a vision of a world that feels really different from the one we're living in right now.
It's ambitious, for sure. But she's saying it's possible. It starts with each of us choosing to go high.
Lead with empathy, be intentional about our actions, and use our voices to create real change.
It's a call to action that I think really resonates, and one that we can all answer in our own way. And it takes courage, right, to actually live that way. Compassion, too, and a willingness to, like, step outside your comfort zone. But she shows us it's possible.
And it's funny because it all comes back to that advice her mom gave her. Remember, come home, we like you here.
Oh, yeah, I loved that part. So simple, but so grounding. Like, at the end of the day, it's those connections that really matter. The love we give, the love we get, and how we impact the world, you know?
It's about that balance, right? Striving for something bigger than yourself, but also staying connected to those roots, those people that remind you who you really are.
And that authenticity piece, it's not just about saying whatever pops into your head, right?
Like word vomit.
Haha, exactly. It's about choosing those words carefully, with empathy, with intention.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into Michelle Obama's world, I'm curious, what really stuck with you? What's resonating?
For me, it's that image of the mandatory trickling down. Like, wow, everyone having the chance to actually thrive, no matter what their background is. It's a goal worth fighting for, even if it seems impossible sometimes.
Yeah, for me, it's how honest she is about the hard stuff, both personally and, with everything going on in the world. She doesn't sugarcoat it, but she also gives you this sense of hope.
Totally. It's like, yeah, things are tough, but we can do something about it. We all have a role to play.
Even those small actions, right?
Yeah.
They can make a difference. I think this deep dive gave us a lot to think about, a lot to process. Hopefully spark some ideas, too, about how to bring a little bit of that Michelle Obama magic into our own lives.
Absolutely. Whether it's those relationships, managing all the crazy information out there, or just approaching things with more, authenticity and strategy, there's something here for everyone, I think.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it helpful, maybe even a little inspiring. And remember, as Michelle Obama says, when they go low, we go high.